Your phone dies. You're standing on a street you don't recognize, in a city you've visited a dozen times, and suddenly you have no idea which way is home. Not a rough idea. No idea. You stand there, turning in a slow circle, waiting for a blue dot that isn't coming. This isn't a small inconvenience. It's a symptom of something much stranger than it looks. For most of human history, this exact situation would have been almost unthinkable. Not because people had better technology, because they didn't need any. Ancient humans could walk hundreds of miles through unfamiliar terrain, cross open ocean with no land in sight for weeks, and still know exactly where they were and exactly how to get back. No map, no compass, no screen. Just a mind built for something you've almost completely lost the use of. So what happened? How did a skill this powerful just disappear? Start with the ocean, because it's the clearest example of just how far this ability could go. Long before European sailors clung to coastlines out of fear of the open sea, Pacific Islanders were doing something that still sounds impossible today. They were sailing thousands of miles across open water, between tiny islands, separated by nothing but horizon, and arriving exactly where they intended to. An anthropologist named David Lewis spent years studying how this was actually done. He sailed alongside traditional navigators in the Pacific and documented a system that had nothing to do with instruments. Navigators memorized the rising and setting points of dozens of stars. They read the pattern of ocean swells with their entire bodies, sometimes lying down in the hull of the canoe just to feel how the waves moved beneath them. They tracked cloud formations that hinted at land far over the horizon, the flight paths of specific seabirds that never strayed too far from shore, even subtle shifts in water color and temperature. None of this was mystical. It was data. An enormous, intricate mental map built from years of training, passed down from navigator to apprentice, refined constantly through direct experience. A single master navigator carried what amounted to a complete oceanic GPS system entirely inside his own memory. Now go from open water to open desert, and you'll find something just as extraordinary happening on land. Aboriginal Australian communities developed what are often called songlines. These were not decorations or performances. They were functional navigation systems, encoded into song, story, and rhythm. A songline traced a specific path across the landscape, and the lyrics themselves described landmarks in the order you'd actually encounter them while walking. A particular rock formation, a bend in a dry riverbed, a cluster of trees that only appeared after a certain ridge. By singing the song correctly, a traveler could navigate a route stretching hundreds of miles through terrain that looked, to an untrained eye, almost featureless. The information wasn't stored on paper. It was stored in memory, reinforced through rhythm and repetition, durable enough to be passed down across countless generations without ever being written down at all. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This wasn't a rare, specialized talent reserved for a gifted few. This was baseline human capability. Ordinary people, across wildly different environments and cultures, developed extraordinarily precise internal maps as a completely normal part of growing up. So why can't you do this? The honest answer involves your brain, and it's not flattering. There's a part of your brain called the hippocampus, and one of its central jobs is building spatial maps, tracking your position within an environment, and helping you find your way from one place to another. It's not a fixed structure. It responds to how much you actually use it, the same way a muscle does. In the early 2000s, a neuroscientist named Eleanor Maguire studied London taxi drivers, specifically the ones who had passed a notoriously brutal test known as the knowledge, which requires memorizing roughly 25,000 streets across the city without any GPS assistance. Using brain scans, She found that these drivers had a measurably larger posterior hippocampus compared to people who hadn't done this training. Their brains had physically changed in response to the demand of building and using a real mental map, day after day, for years. That's the encouraging half of the story. Here's the less encouraging half. More recent research, led by neuroscientist Veronique Bobot, has looked at what happens to the hippocampus in people who rely heavily on GPS navigation instead of building their own internal map. The pattern that emerges is troubling. People who consistently outsource navigation to a device tend to show reduced activity, and in some cases, reduced volume, in exactly the same hippocampal region that grew larger in Maguire's taxi drivers. The skill, quite literally, atrophies when it isn't used, which means every time you follow a blue arrow on a screen instead of building your own sense of the route, you're not just skipping a mental exercise. You're actively letting a capability shrink, a little at a time, one uneventful car trip after another. This raises an uncomfortable question. If ancient humans were building elaborate mental maps just by living their normal lives, what does that say about how you're spending yours? Consider what wayfinding actually demanded of ancient people: constant, active attention to their surroundings, where the sun rose that morning, which direction the wind was blowing, what the terrain looked like the last time they passed through it, and how it had changed since. None of this was optional extra credit. It was baseline awareness required simply to survive and return home. Your ancestors weren't unusually gifted. They were unusually attentive, because attention was the price of admission to staying alive. Compare that to how you move through the world today. You get in a car, or you open an app, and you switch off. Not metaphorically, literally. Studies on GPS use have shown that people following turn-by-turn directions show less brain activity in navigation-related regions than people navigating the same route without assistance. The device isn't just helping you get somewhere. It's doing the specific mental work your hippocampus evolved to do, which means that part of your brain gets to sit the exercise out entirely. None of this means GPS is some kind of villain. Nobody's arguing you should navigate cross-country by starlight instead of using your phone. The convenience is real, and so is the safety it provides in genuinely unfamiliar or dangerous situations. But convenience always comes with a quiet trade, and this is one you were probably never told about. Every shortcut your brain gets to take is a form of practice your brain doesn't get to do. There's something almost poetic about how ancient wayfinding actually worked. It wasn't really about the destination at all. It was about a relationship with your environment, really looking at where you were, noticing details most people today walk straight past without a second glance. A subtle change in vegetation, a shift in the angle of shadows across the ground, the exact sound wind makes moving through a specific kind of tree. None of that data mattered because it was pretty to look at. It mattered because it kept you oriented, and being oriented, for most of human history, was the same thing as being safe. So the next time your phone dies, and you feel that jolt of disorientation standing on an unfamiliar street, try something different before reaching for a stranger's directions. Stop. Look around. Actually look. The way your ancestors were forced to look every single day, just to survive. Notice which direction the sun is leaning. Notice a landmark you can hold on to. You're not lost because you're incapable. You're lost because a part of your brain that used to do this work automatically has been sitting quietly on the sidelines, waiting for you to ask it to work again. Your phone dies. You're standing on a street you don't recognize. But somewhere inside you is a navigation system your ancestors trusted with their lives, older than any map, older than any compass. Still there. Still capable. Just waiting for you to finally look up and use it.